Welcome to today's webinar, Young Children, Assistive Technology, and Accessible Materials. I'm Cynthia Curry. I'm co-director of the AIM Center, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar. Our presenters today are Terry Rosen and Elizabeth Berry. They are Assistive Technology Specialists at the Pacer Simon Technology Center, and we're really, the AIM Center is delighted that they have agreed to provide this webinar for us today. Just a few logistical items before we begin. I'd like to thank, in addition to the Pacer Center representatives today, Diana Carl, who is a special projects coordinator for the AIM Center, who was the impetus behind this webinar, and she reached out to the Simon Technology Center asking if they would be interested in providing a webinar for us. Would also like to thank Donna, our caption provider. You will see in the lower left side of your screen, she is live captioning our webinar today. In addition to the webinar itself, the transcript that Donna is producing will also be available on our website. We archived there within a couple of days, hopefully by tomorrow. It being Thanksgiving week, it may be next Monday before the archive is available, but we will do our very best to post it shortly after the webinar ends. At the conclusion of the webinar, we're going to post an evaluation, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. We use it for continuous improvement of our technical assistance. It should take you about 2 minutes to complete that. So thank you in advance. So I'm going to go ahead and pass over the webinar to our special guests, Terry and Elizabeth.
Hi everyone, this is Terry Rosen from the Pacer Center. We are coming from Bloomington, Minnesota today. It's actually decently warm here today. We've got, you know, a high of close to 50, which is really awesome and warm for us. So we're happy to join you, like Cynthia said. And we're going to be talking to you today about young children, assistive technology, and accessible materials. And this is a topic that both Elizabeth and I spend a lot of time thinking about. We both work on early childhood and early elementary assistive technology projects here at the Pacer Center. I run something called Project KITE. KITE stands for Kids Included Through Technology Are Enriched, and it's a small group assistive technology training program for Minnesotans. And they form teams of parents and educators, and I travel around the state to deliver those trainings to them. Other than that, you know, my background is actually as a teacher. I taught for about 10 years before coming to the Pacer Center at various levels. Most of my time was spent at the elementary level. And then when I came to Pacer, I started my journey with assistive technology.
And welcome everyone. My name is Elizabeth Berry, and my background is in early childhood special education. And then I've been here at Pacer for about 3 years, and I currently work on our TIKES project, which we love acronyms here, stands for Technology to Improve Kids' Educational Success, where we're working with school districts and families here in Minnesota to increase the use of assistive technology with young children ages birth to 5. So that's a little bit of our background that we bring today. But before we really dive into the material today, we wanted to give you a quick background on Pacer and what we do here. Pacer was founded in the late 1970s, really on the idea of parents helping parents. And so we're a nonprofit organization helping parents and professionals really navigate and understand their rights in the special education system. So we currently have over 30 different projects here at Pacer, ranging from the National Bullying Prevention Center to the National Center on Transition and Employment, as well as the Simon Technology Center where Terry and I work.
Okay, and so the slide that you see now, that's just a glance at what our center looks like. We have lots of different types of technology in our technology center, but we also have a few different core services that we offer. one of which is information and referral. We receive a lot of questions and phone calls from parents and educators at varying stages of knowledge of assistive technology. Sometimes they are just getting started and aren't sure where to go and what to look at. So we are there to help with those questions. And what you're seeing in that image is also our lending library. We do have an assistive technology and lending library for parents and educators. So they're able to check out items for a period of a month at a time so that they can actually trial items before they decide if they want to purchase. We do have a very wide range of technology ranging from very low tech to very high tech, like you can see the telepresence robot right in the front there. That's something that's in our inventory. We also offer free assistive technology consultations for Minnesota families. And this is really a time for families to come in, meet one-on-one with a specialist so they can learn about the types of things that are out there. These aren't assessments, but it's a great place for parents and educators as well to learn about what's available to them. We do individualized trainings for families if they're interested in getting more of an idea on how to actually use a very specific piece of technology. And we also offer workshops and in-services for parents, educators, universities. We do some professional development with school districts as well. And then some of the special projects, like I mentioned, that Elizabeth and I work on. And our agenda today, we have kind of a broad overview of what we're going to be talking about. The first thing we want to do is make sure that everybody really understands what assistive technology is. So we'll define assistive technology for you. We'll talk a bit about the consideration process and how to choose the quote-unquote right AT, some places you can find assistive technology. And then, we'll have some time for some closing thoughts and questions. And throughout the presentation, we'll have assistive technology sprinkled all throughout it. And we will also have a few interactive polls so that we can, get a little bit of an idea on who you are and what your background is. And everybody's at a very different place with their knowledge of assistive technology, so it's one of the functions of those polls, just to give us an idea. And we really encourage you to ask questions as the webinar is going on. We'll certainly save time at the end for that, but please feel free to go ahead and ask them as we go through, and either Elizabeth or myself will answer them, or if it's something more pertaining to the AIM Center, then Cynthia or Diana will go ahead and answer those questions. So the first thing we would love for you to do is to take our first poll, which is, who's here? So we want to know, would you define yourself as a parent, an early childhood professional, a related service provider, an AT specialist, or other? And really, this will just help to give us an idea of our audience today. We have an idea on who will likely be here, but it'll just be great to know, exactly who is in our audience. So thank you so much for going ahead and taking that poll. So it's looking like we have some AT specialists in here, which is great, and then kind of sprinkled amongst different types of professionals. Looks like currently nobody is qualifying themselves as a parent, so that is good. Oh, it looks like we do have one parent so far, so that will definitely inform us as we are presenting today.
All right. So now let's kind of get a background in defining assistive technology so we can all really be on the same page as we're going forward. Assistive technology consists of devices and the technology and the things that we think of, but it also has a services component. And so if we think about the definition of assistive technology, it's defined in the federal law of the Individuals with Disability and Education Act. Assistive technology devices are any item, piece of equipment, or product system which is used to maintain, increase, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. And so really it's anything that helps a child with a disability do something that they couldn't do without it. And there are lots of different categories of assistive, and they can include daily living aids such as different utensils or cups or things like that, as well as mobility aids such as wheelchairs or sanders, or sensory aids, or as well as different communication tools for reading and writing.
And then the other piece of that is that assistive technology also includes the services. This is the people side of things. So not only knowing what the technology is, but how do I pick it? What do I do if I need to repair it? Who needs to be trained in the use of the assistive technology? And then when we put the services and the technology together, that creates, the holistic picture of assistive technology. And sometimes people wonder, why do we include assistive technology? Well, the first thing is that it's actually federal law. The Individuals with Disabilities Education does require that assistive technology be considered for all students with an IEP or an IFSP. And depending on what age group you work with determines whether that's an IEP or an IFSP, which is for younger students. The second reason that we include AT is that it's actually best practice and it's good for kids. So, when you think about it, tools that you can use to increase a student's participation, that's going to be good for kids and good for their educational experience. So like I was saying, one of the reasons we use AT is because we want to increase the participation and opportunities for our students. And because really what this does is it helps to create a foundation for development for these kiddos. And AT really can serve as a bridge between what the child's current skill level is and what we want them to do. And if you take a look at the picture in that slide, we've got a do-it-yourself slant board that we created with a cylindrical box and a clipboard and then some Velcro. And then the crayon that's being used is called a Crayola Slick Stick. And what that is it's a really soft crayon that really makes it very easy for a student to write because they don't have to put a lot of pressure. And a student that was involved in the projects that I run, he really found that these worked really well for him because he was able to write without having to have a lot of physical effort. And one of the activities that was an everyday thing in their classroom was that students came in, they grabbed their wipe-off card with their name on it, and then they worked on writing their name. And for him, he hated that activity because it was really frustrating and hard for him because he wasn't able to put the kind of pressure down that he needed to be able to practice writing his name. And then when he started using these Crayola twistable slick sticks, he was able to write it easily because he could, go through the motion of making the letters, but he didn't have to have that physical demand. So it really created a bridge between what his skills are and what he could do and what we wanted him to do. And one question that is really common for us to get is, well, whose responsibility is it to consider assistive technology? And we really believe that it's everybody's responsibility. And a student's team consists of parents, teachers, related service providers, and a lot of times it tends to fall on one person. And a lot of times that person tends to be an OT or a speech-language pathologist. And really, the way to make this more manageable is for people to think about it as everyone's responsibility. Thinking about and including assistive technology can sometimes feel really big, but when it's shared, it becomes manageable and also meaningful because all the parties are on board with that process.
So if it is everyone's responsibility, how do we consider assistive technology as a team? And so, like we mentioned earlier, the law tells us that we have to consider assistive technology, but it doesn't really tell us what that process looks like. And so it really can be a discussion among the child's team about their current progress, what we would like for them to be able to do, and how AT might help meet their needs. And so there are 4 possible outcomes of consideration most often. The first is that AT was considered and is not needed at this time. And so the team has had this conversation and they determined that the student does not need assistive technology to meet their goals. And we folded at this time because this is really an ongoing process, and so that it's something that you don't decide once and then you're done, but it's something that can and should be revisited. And so the second possible outcome is that the student is successfully using AT. And a third outcome of your consideration process might be that the team has determined that the child who is not currently using AT needs AT, and we have enough information to make decisions about specific AT. And the fourth possible outcome is that the child needs assistive technology, but the team needs more information to determine the types of AT that would meet the needs of the child. And so although there are these 4 possible outcomes of our consideration process, we really need to make sure that it's a child-centered process, and so that we're starting with the child rather than the tool, because oftentimes it can be very easy to get really excited about a different tool or a new tool and think about how can I use this with my child or with my students, but it might not necessarily meet the needs of that particular individual. So it's really keeping in mind that we're starting with the child and having a discussion about their needs, and then thinking about what tools are available that might help meet those needs.
So some resources for including assistive technology are, first and foremost, the SETT process, and this was created by Joy Zabala. And this really is a model for best practice assistive technology inclusion. And the reason why this is best practice and why, we like it so much, and the AIM Center obviously likes it so much, is that it's child-centered, like Elizabeth was mentioning. We also have some PACER-created documents that were built based upon, these principles. And, one thing that we were often hearing from professionals when they were thinking about assistive technology is that, it was one more thing that they had to do, another thing on their plate. And so what we wanted to do as an organization is create something that would make the consideration process easy for them and not like something that created a ton of extra work for them. But we still wanted them to be mindful and really thoughtful about the consideration process and still using, the principles of SETT when they did it. So the SETT framework, in case you are not familiar with it, SETT is here for you. It stands for, the S is for student, E is for environment, the T is for tasks, and the second T is for tools. And, it's really common for anybody to start with a really cool tool and ask, how can I use this? For example, at the PACER Center, one thing that commonly happens is that a parent or an educator as well, but often a parent will come to us with an iPad, and they'll say, okay, I bought this iPad, now how can we use this? How can we use this super awesome tool to supplement what we're doing with our child? Or how can we use this to improve my child's learning? But what we would really like people to do, and what this framework encourages people to do, is to flip that and really start on the side of student needs. Thinking about who is that student, what makes them who they are, what are their physical needs, what are their cognitive needs, and then once we're really thinking about the student holistically, then we're thinking about the environment. Where are they going to be learning? What are they going to be doing in that environment? And how is that environment going to influence how they could possibly learn and how they could possibly use a tool? The next thing that we want to consider is tasks. What is their learning objective? What are we asking that student to do? And how can we use the tool to make that more manageable? And then the last thing we want to think about is the tool. And like I said, it's really common for that to be flipped around and to think about it, tool first, but we really want to think about it in a child-centered framework. And this sounds like something that is a natural process for many people, and I think for a lot of people it is. So, you might be hearing this and saying, well, I do that all the time anyway. I didn't know about the SETT framework, but this is just how I think about it. And if you're thinking about things in a truly child-centered way, you probably already are thinking about this in that way. So we'll kind of transition into some of the documents that we created at the PACER Center.
Right. So the 3 child-centered planning documents that we created here at PACER were created through our Technology to Improve Kids' Educational Success project, or our TIKES project, which has an early childhood focus. So these plans, although they were created with an early childhood audience in mind, they can definitely be used across ages. So there are 3 documents, and I can show you a visual of each in a moment. But they include an AT consideration flowchart, a 2-page child-centered AT plan as a documentation guide, and then an expanded child-centered AT plan for those situations where you might need a more comprehensive guide. And all of these documents are available on our website. So if you're interested in exploring them further or downloading them, you can go to the link that's on your screen. And we also, on our website, have a more detailed training that will go through each of these, because I'm going to talk about them very briefly, but if you would like a more in-depth training, that is also on the PACER website. So the AT consideration flowchart is really just a planning guide and a visual guide, and it is color-coded with key questions as well as the 4 outcomes of consideration in blue there that we mentioned earlier. And so it's really just a flow chart to start at the top and ask, is the student making adequate progress on their goals in the general education curriculum and participating in the least restrictive environment? And then depending on how you answer that question, it can guide you through the process to help determine what assistive technology may be needed for the student. And so the purple boxes that's below lead you to some action items that you can then use to document on the 2-page child-centered AT plan. And I should mention that there is a document, a set for the IFSP and the set for an IEP, so you can use depending on the age of the child that you're working with. And so what this child-centered AT plan does is it really just allows you to document that consideration conversation that you had as a team. So you can write out what AT the student is using or what AT you want to try, as well as it gives you some ideas about how you could document that in the child's IFSP or IEP so everyone can be on the same page.
And I'll just add that they also created a version that is not branded with the TIKES logo, so if you wanted to use it with, potentially even an older student, but not have the blocks that make it look very early childhood or early elementary, there is a non-branded one as well.
Yes. So this is the first page of the document, and so this page includes the first 2 outcomes of consideration that we went through before, whereas the second page includes the 3rd and 4th outcome of consideration. And so this is a tool where you really only need to fill out one of those 4 sections depending on the student that you're working with. So it's just a nice way to document what you've discussed, and it's something that can live on and other people can be aware of what the outcomes were.
And this 2-page document, too, was also meeting that need that I mentioned earlier, where educators wanted something that was quick and easy to fill out, but would still kind of guide them in their process. But this 2-page document is something that they can easily fill out for their individual students. And the districts that we worked with through the TIKES program, there are some districts that are actually using these documents district-wide in their consideration process.
And then the third planning tool that we created is the expanded child-centered AT plan. And there's a version for both, again, for the IFSP and the IEP. But again, they're very similar. It's just considering what environment the child will be using it. And this is a longer planning tool if you decide you need more information or you would just like more of a guide. And there are different sections for the current assistive technology use, the areas of need, as well as trying and trialing AT. And then training that might be needed for members of the team, whether it be how to use a certain app on the iPad or whatever you have decided to use, as well as deciding roles for setup and maintenance, whose job is it going to be to charge the communication device each day, as well as a backup plan that for if the technology breaks or is unavailable, what will be the next steps. And then very clearly defining those AT roles so everyone knows what their role is, as well as then documenting your decisions and creating some action items.
And one piece that I just want to touch on is actually two pieces, but one is the training piece. One thing that's really common that we hear from either parents or educators is that, this is the tool that's in the student's IFSP or IEP, but we don't know how to use it. And if everybody who works with that child doesn't know how to use the assistive technology, the technology is not going to be used. It's going to sit on a shelf, and it's not going to benefit anyone. So making sure that everybody involved knows how to use that. And then the second thing I want to touch on is the idea of having a backup plan. So if you have a student that is very dependent on one particular type of technology, it is really vital to have a backup plan for what happens if that technology breaks, or what happens if we don't have access to it that day. One example that pops to mind is with a group that I worked with, the student used an FM system in the classroom. She had a hearing impairment, and that FM system broke, and they didn't have a backup plan. So you can imagine how much instruction that student missed out on because they were not able to hear the instruction as clearly as they could have had there been a backup plan for that technology breaking. And then knowing, if that does happen, who is going to be the person who fixes that or who gets the backup piece of technology. So this just really helps you to have a really thoughtful consideration of all the parts of both the assistive technology devices and services, and still being very child-centered.
And I noticed there in the chat.
Oh, good. This is Cynthia. I was just going to make sure that you saw the question from Renee.
Yes, I did. And so Renee's
great.
Is do the districts include these forms in their IEPs? And the districts that we've worked with have kind of done a few different things. Some districts include them in the child's kind of overall folder, but there are part of the forms does include kind of a prompt for where to document in the IEPs. So ideally, what the information that's on this form should be included in the IEP, either in the assistive technology section if it's there, or if not, in the accommodations and modifications, but you could certainly also include the form as well.
Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about, what that consideration process looks like, the next thing is, how do we choose the right assistive technology? And, that really isn't an easy question. And it's something that when people start to think about assistive technology can be really overwhelming for a lot of people. If you Google assistive technology, or if you Google a category of assistive technology, you get a very overwhelming amount of things coming back at you. So when people, sometimes very quickly go through this when they're having their IEP meetings or IFSP meetings, they very quickly click the checkbox that says assistive technology was considered and not used at this time, or not needed at this time. And sometimes that is because, it might not be needed, but sometimes it's also because people just aren't sure what that really means and what it looks like and what types of things should be included as assistive technology. And, they're just not really sure where to begin with that. So when we think about assistive technology, it's really a very broad category of different types of tools. And as you can see from the slide, there's really a continuum when you think about assistive technology, ranging from low-tech items that are, they tend to be inexpensive, pretty easy to get because you don't necessarily have to get them from specialty stores. And typically you can pick them up and you can use them without a lot of extensive training. They tend to be pretty intuitive to use, although not exclusively. But those are things, like what you see in the picture. It might be an adapted book. It might be, you can see the lower book in that photo has popsicle sticks that have been attached and used to help a student turn a page more efficiently if they have some motor needs and refined motor challenges. But that could also be, things like pencil grips or adapted crayons, different types of adapted paper, a slant board, things that, don't, have a brain and do any thinking on their own. There's also things that are considered medium or mid-tech, and typically those are items that are electronic in some fashion, so they may have a battery or, be charged through different means. They don't tend to be super expensive. They tend to be more mid-priced, and they might include some things like you see in that picture, like switches, switch-adapted toys, Big Macs, single-message output items. If you're thinking about communication items, it might be like a GoTalk, which is recordable, but it doesn't have an actual processor that's doing any of that for it. So it's a recordable device. So anything that is electronic could be considered medium or mid-tech. And then that is going up to high-tech, which are things like dedicated communication devices. iPads would be considered high-tech tools, computers, software, Google Chrome extensions, anything that has more advanced technology involved in it. And in terms of the continuum of expenses, it does tend to be more on the expensive side of things. And for a lot of people using that item, it's going to require a bit more training to use it successfully. So we'll pull in our next poll right here. And this poll is asking, what types of assistive technology are you most familiar with? Like I mentioned, everybody is at a different place with their knowledge of assistive technology. Some people are really into tech, so they might really, love, high-tech things like iPads and apps. And some people, might be more familiar with lower-tech items, like sensory items, different types of adapted book, art materials, or like I mentioned, those mid-tech items that might be recordable or have a battery involved. And in looking at some of your responses here, looks like we have a lot of people who are kind of on the techie side of things, that they are most familiar with high-tech items. It looks like we have a fair amount of people who are pretty familiar with medium or mid-tech items. And then interestingly, we're having a lower percentage of people who are familiar with low-tech items. And I suspect that sometimes people might not be responding in that category because there might be things that are considered assistive technology, but they don't think of as assistive technology. But really, like that definition that Elizabeth gave, that was a very jargony federal definition. Assistive technology is anything that helps a student do something that they couldn't do without it. So it really is a very broad category of items.
And I'm also noticing in the chat window that there are a few people who are saying all of the above, which is
great.
Also something that maybe we should have added as an option as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, next time we'll add that. Thank you for your feedback on that.
All right.
Okay. So, in thinking about, this very broad category of assistive technology, sometimes the question is, what assistive technology is the best? And, as we talked about, this is a challenging question because there are many variables that go into, that consideration process on, what is going to be the best thing for that particular student. So, at the Pacer Center, we sometimes like to think of ourselves kind of as Switzerland. We don't necessarily promote a specific type or a specific brand of assistive technology, but we really want to figure out what's going to be the best for that particular student in their environment with their skills that they have and the skills that they want to work on. So the first category that we're going to talk about is pertaining to different categories of literacy. And obviously one of the things that pops to mind for that are different types of books. And that's, one thing that, you think about, in terms of things that you use with children. Books are something that you start to use with children when they're infants. And some of the things that you're seeing on the screen are things that are going to be used with a broad range of individuals, but could be starting to be used with an individual or with a child as early as, being an infant. As long as they can, look at and interact and see a book, they could be using a book. And one way to make them more interactive is to use books that are made with accessible materials. And one of those is, using a book that has tabs in it that make it easier to interact with the book and turn the pages. The book that's in there, I believe that is a book created by Usborne. If you're not familiar with that company, they do have a really wide array of different types of book and books that really kind of embrace the idea of something being universally designed for a broad array of students. The next category would be books that are really soft and easy for a student to pick up and interact with. And if you haven't heard about Indestructibles, these are a really fun category of books that really kind of mirror how a child is going to interact with the world. The first thing that a baby or a child will do is to put something in their mouth, and if that's a book, then that doesn't always work. Like one of my son's favorite books was Mr. Brown Can Moo, and it was a board book, and and by the time he was 2, that book was destroyed because it was his favorite book to put in his mouth and interact with. But Indestructibles are made with a material that is really tough, and it's also waterproof. So it's something that a kiddo can put in their mouth. They can try and chew it, but they're probably not going to be able to because of what the material feels like. If they want to bring it in the bathtub with them, they can do that. If they want to try and, chew on it, if it gets wet, it's not going to be ruined by that. And also, if there's a ton of germs, if you're using this in a classroom situation, these can also be washed. So it's a really kind of cool material for a book to be made out of. A puppet board book is just a book that's literally attached to a hand puppet. So this, might not be what the student is using, but it might be what the educator or the parent is using to read a story to a student, so it becomes more interactive. So the next category of books that we have are books that are tactile, books that have a sensory component built right into them. So the books that you see on the screen, one, really does have just like a tactile texture built into that book. The next one is a book with tabs that fold out or go in, just so that they are inviting to a student in a different way.
And so there are also books available that have sound, song, and movement built into them. And so these can really build an association between words and sounds, such as animal sounds, like the book on the left is another Usborne book. It's called Noisy Farm. And on the right, you can push the different buttons for each animal, and it makes the sound of the animal. So you can start to do some word and name sound association there. And you can really appeal to more senses in different means of engagement. So songs such as Itsy Bitsy Spider can be helpful in remembering a story, and even with the buttons you can work on things like cause and effect and different things like that, and really just engage students and try and gain their attention in different ways. Here at Pacer, we're big fans of do-it-yourself and DIY options, and so we and one of those options is use page fluffers or spacers. And so you can either have them be removable or permanent. And so if you see in the picture on the left there is a removable option that we did with clips from the dollar store. And so that way that the pages are more easily able to be turned for a student who might not have the fine motor control to pick up each page and turn. So you can removable options, you can use clothespins, paper clips, or wire clips. There's lots of different options. And the removable is nice if it's a library book, or if you don't want it to be there long term. It's something that you can use, but then also take away. But you can also add page fluffers to books in a more permanent way, such as the picture there on the right. We used Velcro and folded it over to be a way that you can then use to turn the pages. So you can use that Velcro, pipe cleaners, hot glue dots, or other furniture pads as a pretty inexpensive way to make books a little more accessible motorically. And another adaptation that we really like here is to add some tactile elements to books. So the picture on the top left there, I believe is Ducky's Rainbow. Mm-hmm. That's the name of the book, and it has different colored pages in the rainbow, and we can't really tell in the picture, but we used puffy paint in different designs to mark each page so that if a student could feel with their hands the difference between each page. And the picture there on the right is Brown Bear, which is a pretty popular book for little kids. But we've added a tactile element to each page and added it to the entire animal on the page, so that if a student with low vision was feeling that, they could be able to feel the entire shape of the animal and understand what animal was there on the page. So there's lots of options that you can use to add some tactile elements to a book pretty inexpensively.
Okay, so the next category of books is our digital books, and this is something that, as more families and more schools have tablets and iPads, that is becoming more common. And even though it's high-tech, we really want to make the point that, just because it's a high-tech item, that it's not something that you then give to a child and send them off with it. We still really think it's important, and the research shows that it's really important that you are still using these tools with a child, so that it's really, they're actively engaged with the tool, even if it's a screen that they could be interacting with on their own. But we want to make sure that both parents and educators are still, reading with the child, and they're really scaffolding the learning as they go through. And this, what these can do is they can provide another means of accessible reading for the child, one of which is called Tumble Books. This is something that is very commonly used by public library systems or school districts. A school district might have Tumble Books on their school's library website, so students can log in. Sometimes they require a password, sometimes they don't, so depending on how the district sets that up. Or in the case of public library systems, typically you have to log into it with a library card and a password to get access to that. And then what Tumble Books is it's all really great examples of real children's literature, but there's very subtle animation, and it also has a read aloud component. So it's all read aloud by professional voice actors that are reading the book. Sometimes it's the authors themselves that are reading them. And then it also highlights the sentence that the student is on, so that way you can associate, the words that are being said with the words that are highlighted on the page. So it just helps to really, encourage students to understand that words have meaning, and that the words on the book or on the page of the book, carry meaning in what they're hearing in the book. If you're using a Kindle with a student, there are a really wide array of children's books available on the Kindle. sometimes you don't have access to that multisensory component with a Kindle, but it is something that would be available as another means of books. And also, if you're traveling, it's a great way to have a lot of books available to a student in a very small amount of space. There's interactive iPad books and apps, and some examples that are really common for that are books by Sandra Boynton. Has a whole series of books that are in app form. Dr. Seuss, and there's also a really wide array of Sesame Street books that are available in an app format. And the thing that's kind of fun about them is that not only does it have that read aloud component, but it's also interactive. So in the case of a Dr. Seuss book app that you can see on the screen, it reads them aloud to you, but then as you tap on different parts of the page, it's going to say what the item is, and it's going to show you the word. So again, reinforcing that idea of words and text having meaning and association with what the student is learning. Amazon has something called WhisperSync for their Audible books, so you can see and hear the text as well. And then Nook for Kids is another example of that. And then some mid-tech tools to make books more accessible. Would be a tool like the Franklin AnyBook Reader. And this is something that works with a reading pen. You can see that student in the upper picture is holding that white reading pen. And it works with small circular recordable stickers. And they're re-recordable, actually, and repositionable. And so the individual, would have to program the book ahead of time with the text from that page. But it's a way, a student can read that book, perhaps in a more independent format. But we've also seen people use the AnyBook Reader in a lot of different ways. I had a student once that was really motivated by Elmo, and there was a teacher at the school that could do a great Elmo voice. So they created stickers, with different, Elmo phrases. So if the student, maybe got through a task, then they got to hear Elmo. Or I've seen teachers use this with a student's, daily schedule. So when they get to school, they take out the AnyBook Reader and they tap that dot, and then it might say, your first job. Okay, so I was talking about the AnyBook Reader being able to be used lots of different ways, and that's something that is really a pretty low-cost item. I was looking on Amazon earlier and doing research for this just to make sure I was kind of current on what the prices were, and you can buy one of those AnyBook Readers for under $30, and I saw some even available on Amazon for under $20. So it's a pretty inexpensive thing to have in your classroom, and really pretty easy to use and easy to program. Another example of a mid-tech tool would be something, that would allow a student to be included, with a book that has repeatable lines. So, a lot of books that are written for early childhood and younger students have repeatable lines that might be repeating, every page or every other page. But what a Big Mac would allow you to do would be to record, that line of the book, and then when it becomes a choral reading activity with the class, the student who may have a communication challenge can push the Big Mac, and they can also be involved in that. And that would be an example of an augmentative communication app or device, being used, in the context of a literacy example.
And you can also use high-tech AAC apps and devices as well to make books accessible for that repeatable lines. I've seen students be able to, say for Brown Bear, have that repeatable line in their device, and so then when it's their turn in the reading, they have that available to them and can participate in the reading.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the other, thing that we would want to make sure that we're considering in the context of literacy, and actually not just literacy, this could be for many different activities, would be positioning. So for some students, may not have any communication or cognitive challenges that are affecting their ability to interact, but it might be more related to a student's physical needs. So you might consider using a slant board, and there's lots of different types of slant boards. The one that you see in the picture is actually one that we, Elizabeth mentioned we like DIY here, and that's something that we made here, and that is, created out of actually it's a printer paper box that was just cut at an angle, and then a clip was added so you can clip either a book or paper or whatever kind of material that you're using to that. So, a slant board can help bring those materials closer to a student so that they can see it better, but also so that way they can actually physically interact with it in an easier fashion. So we're removing some of the physical demand so that the student can be cognitively involved. Other examples of that are the Visual Edge slant board and the ErgoRite reading board, which is a really nice heavy-duty wood board that you can prop books on, and then there's a little elastic at the top that keeps it there. Another thing you might consider is attaching a book to a wheelchair tray, and I'm going to let Elizabeth speak to those DIY options that are listed there.
DIY way that we've used to attach a book to a wheelchair tray for a little girl who was very interested in books but couldn't hold them in her hands is we just took a shower ring and attached it to the book with some tape, and then put that shower ring around a bungee cord or a bracelet, and then you can use hooks on that bungee cord to hook it to around the wheelchair tray. So then in the example I mentioned, this girl was able to look at this book and turn the pages, but the book wouldn't fall off of her wheelchair tray, so she could keep looking at it and interacting with it. So there are just some different ways to think about positioning with books and other materials as well. And so talked a lot about different ways to make books more accessible for little kids, but there are also, as Terry mentioned, there's lots of assistive technology out there. And so we wanted to talk about a little bit more about what else is available and other possible tools, while still keeping in mind that child-centered process idea that in thinking of the child's needs first rather than the tools, but these are some examples that we find that kids like and benefit from. So in the upper left-hand corner there are an item called pipsquigs, and they have suction cups on one or more end of their ends. So you can suction them to a table, a wheelchair tray, or the wall, or a door, and then they're going to stay there, and so they can be a way to play and interact, because this particular version of the pipsquigs, they have different, each one has a different texture as well as a different noise, so it can be a way to make toys more accessible for little kids.
And there's also a version just called Squigs, which are a much smaller version of them that people can use in a similar way. Or I've also, talked to families who have almost kind of used them like Legos, because the suction cups can go together, so you can kind of build with them as well.
And then the item in the middle is an iPad, and it has the communication app LAMP Words for Life. It's just one example of many communication apps that are out there, and they all have different features that you can look at depending on the needs of the child. But this particular app is set to say, I like playing, and so it can be a way to add that kind of communication aspect to play that, when you see two kids playing, they're often not silent. They're either talking to each other or talking to themselves, but it can be a way to really make that part of play more accessible.
And this particular app also uses something called motor planning, so that's actually part of what LAMP stands for, language acquisition through motor planning. And for a lot of students, knowing, consistently where something is on the page, you build in that motor planning piece, it helps them to know where things are better on the page so that they can be more successful. This isn't the perfect app for every student, but for a lot of students, this can be one that might be helpful for them.
And then in the upper right-hand corner are some finger crayons, and these crayons have a built-in bulb at the bottom, where the bulb is what you can put in the palm of your hand, and it can be a way to make gripping crayons easier. And these crayons are just available commercially. I think you can get them at Target or Amazon, but it can be a nice way to make art more accessible for young kids. And then in the bottom left there is a switch toy, which can make play more accessible for kids who might have some fine motor challenges, where they can push the switch and interact with the toy and play with the toy. And the item in the middle there on the bottom, around the bottle and the marker, are two easy holes, which is a product that has holes on both ends, so you can put it around different items, and they come in different sizes, but then the child can put their hand in between the loop there, and that's a way that they can either hold the marker and draw or play with a baby bottle that they might not be able to hold on their own.
You could really use that with any type of device that fits in it. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't have to just be those two examples. It could really just be whatever type of toy or utensil. I've seen people use them with utensils as well, can fit in the holes.
And then the picture on the bottom right is a tape roll that the different stamps have been taped to around, and so then the child can just roll that back and forth through the ink and then on their paper, so it can be another way to make art accessible for kids. And so a big question that we often get asked is, so there's all this assistive technology out there, how do I find it so that I can use it? And so if different school districts have their own AT resources and library that may be available to the professionals in their districts that they can then use with the students. So that might be a place to start. If you're looking for a certain item, you can see if your school district has it. There are also many technology loan resource programs. Here at the Simon Technology Center, we talked a little bit about the lending library that we have. Our members can loan items for up to 30 days. And that's really to help them make a purchasing decision or to meet a need if their device is broken or if they're waiting for their device to come. And we have memberships available for districts and professionals, families, and consumers, both here in Minnesota as well as nationwide. And we are part of the Minnesota STAR statewide loan network, which the STAR program is a program through the state of Minnesota where people can loan out different items. And there is a loan program in each state. And if you're not in Minnesota and would like to find the loan programs in your state, you can go to the Association of Assistive Technology Act Programs website there, and you can, in the drop-down, find your state, and it should lead you to a loan program in your state.
Another place that you can look is through the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials, which is, who we are doing this webinar through today. They have a great resource page about early learning and accessible educational materials. If you click on that link, you can certainly find lots of different resources that can lead you different places depending on what you're looking for. We happen to notice that PACER is listed in that list, so there are tons of really great resources there. So it would be a good kind of one-stop shop for you to just look at some different resources that are available. And the next thing is to think about, where can I go to find assistive technology? And sometimes that might be at a specialty store. Like there are some really great websites. Fun and Function is one of those websites. The Therapy Shop, that's shop with 2 P's and an E. AbleNet is an organization that has a lot of different assistive technology. So you might be looking at those types of places. AbleNet is also an organization that you can work with if you are going to be billing through waivers or through insurance programs. They can help you through that process. But finding assistive technology does not necessarily have to be through those specialty stores. You can find assistive technology just about anywhere. Amazon.com has just about everything that you can possibly think of. Hardware stores are great places, especially if you are doing some DIY, where you can go to find different resources. And we also find that people who work in those hardware stores tend to be tremendously helpful, with making those things and putting them together. We find a lot of great resources, at dollar stores. So, one of the things that we always think about here is, being really practical and thinking about, making things, affordable for people. And so you can really find some really good low-cost options, when you're creating things. And then Pinterest, you can find lots of really great ideas about assistive technology and ways to implement them. There are so many great DIY activities and ideas that you can search for on Pinterest. And that's just, really one place that you can start and go from there. And if you have any places that, you love and you find assistive technology on, feel free to share them in the chat. I think, we would benefit from hearing those ideas, but all the participants that are involved would also, love to hear where you find things as well.
So once you find AT, then you have to go about trying it. And so a trial really gives a child a chance to try these different types of assistive technology. And then it also gives you a chance to measure its impact to see if what you've chosen to try best meets the child's needs. And these trials typically last 2 to 6 weeks. Can be longer, can be shorter, but it's really important to think about what you're measuring and to take your data so that you can really pinpoint if what you're trying is successful.
And sometimes those trials are formal, like Elizabeth said, where you're actually collecting data to inform your decision. But sometimes those trials are also really informal, like if you're just having a student try a different type of toy. There's lots of ways you can go about that. It doesn't have to be very formal with the data collection. It might be informal as well. And just to kind of build on what Elizabeth said, trials should last more than just a day. I had a teacher that I was working with who said that they tried something with a student for about a day and a half, but they felt like they should probably try it for longer. And I did encourage her, yes, you should try it for longer than a day and a half because, there are many factors playing into that. Students getting used to a new tool, the people around that student, making sure that they understand how to use that tool, and, really giving a student a chance to try it and maybe try it in different classroom environments as well to see if it's going to be a good fit for them.
All right, we just have a few closing thoughts, and then we open it up to your questions, and so please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat box. But just want to reiterate that if the child's needs, environments, or situations change, you can definitely revisit that consideration process and consider other tools and do another trial if your trial isn't successful or if the child's needs change. It is definitely something that you can revisit.
And kind of on that same idea, if you are writing, these different types of tools into a student's IEP or IFSP, we often encourage people to write it in slightly more generic language. So instead of saying, student uses an iPad, to interact with books, you might say student uses an electronic tablet device, so that way, if the student's needs change a little bit, you're not bound by law to use that very specific device. So that's, one thing to kind of consider as you're thinking about kind of building these into a student's plan as well.
And then just that when a child starts using assistive technology at an early age, the research really shows that technology can be really beneficial and life-changing, and that it can be make a change in just a few amounts of use, so that it's something that kind of earlier you start, the better, but it's never too late to start.
And a question that we get a lot from parents is, if I am going to use a tool with a student, is that going to hinder their development? And I would say that's especially common with students with communication needs. for us to get the question, well, I don't want them to use a communication device because I want them to talk. And, what the research is showing for communication, but also for other areas is that, if you're giving a tool to a student that's really serving as a bridge for them to, be able to do the skills that they want to be working on, that it isn't going to hinder their progress. It's actually going to support them as a learner. And it looks like we had a question from somebody asking about the non-branded AT plan form, and that I know Elizabeth is
I'm going to put a link in the chat box here, and it goes to a list of publications, but the non-branded form will be listed on the page as a student-centered AT plan. It's near the bottom of the page. I think they're in alphabetical order, but there you should be able to find the non-branded form. So I'll put that link in here. And then if you're having trouble finding that, please let us know. But there, I can probably put in specific links as well. Let me see here.
And then we also had a question from Sandra, who's letting us know that her team struggle with having assistive technology listed as a service, but really if the team is trained, it can be an accommodation and service not really required anymore. And I think, if I'm interpreting that correctly, Sandra, the question is more about, where that item would go in an IEP or an IFSP. And if I'm wrong, let me know. So it sounds like maybe you're saying that, once everybody knows how to use the tool, that it's not, you wouldn't consider it a service anymore.
Or Sandra, are you talking about like a service in the IEP with
a student that the service or that the student is receiving? And other people are welcome to chime in with questions as well. Okay, so Sandra says they have too many on a caseload. Oh my gosh, yes. Every teacher we work with is just overloaded with their caseloads. Teachers do not always understand that they can support this accommodation.
Right, that if everyone understands, is part of that conversation, and that's a team conversation, that everyone knows how the device works and how you're implementing it, that a teacher could definitely support that service, and that it doesn't necessarily just need to be the assistive technology specialist who's there implementing it, but it's something that everyone can be a part of.
Yeah, that idea of, AT being everybody's responsibility, like maybe one person is in charge of, the training piece, but, that the responsibility is really falling on all parts of that team, including parents, because parents are a part of the student's educational team, using those pieces of technology and also knowing how to use it with the student. Looks like we've got some other questions maybe coming. Okay, any ideas for a middle school student with significant speech intelligibility impact but who struggles with spelling? Something popping to my mind for a middle school student who maybe struggles with spelling would be, potentially a text-based app that is going to use some word prediction.
Or there can be different communication apps can kind of put that text and symbol together, so it can be kind of a way, so you don't necessarily have to write and spell what you want to say, but you can use symbols, and then add in, use that communication so that in a different app that it might say the word apple, for an example, but it also gives me a way that I don't necessarily have to spell what I want to say, but I can still say what I want to say.
And Betty, are you asking, to support the student with communication or more to support the student with writing and spelling? Okay, so for a middle school student, Betty, I would really encourage you to check out a couple of resources. One that I like a lot and I found, to be pretty effective with a lot of students would be something called Co-Writer, and that is by the company Don Johnston. They make a wide array of different tools for students with different types of needs. And what Co-Writer does is it uses word prediction that recognizes things like phonetic and inventive spelling, so that, as a student is spelling, they can spell in the way that makes sense to them, but they can potentially, have the right words pop up because it's recognizing those things. And you can also create topic dictionaries within that to make sure that you have the right vocabulary available to that student. So if they're writing a paragraph about the Civil War, if you type in the Civil War as your topic dictionary, it's going to pull in that context-specific vocabulary. And there's co-writers available in a couple different formats, one of which is Co-Writer Universal, which is available in app format, but it's also available as a Google Chrome extension, and as the Co-Writer keyboard, so that you can use it in a variety of different apps. Any place you need to type, you can have that Co-Writer word prediction support. And you can also use dictation as it works for the student or doesn't work. And what's common is for students to use kind of a combination of word prediction and dictation as well. And Sandra suggested Read and Write for Google. That was going to be my second suggestion. So thank you for that great suggestion, Sandra. That has a ton of these same types of tools available built into it. It's a Google Chrome extension, like Sandra mentioned, so you have to subscribe to it through TextHelp, which is the company that makes it, and then it becomes a toolbar on your Google Chrome browser, and so you have tools like a dictionary, a picture dictionary, you have that word prediction tool available in there. And for older students, there's also like highlighting tools where you can highlight in different colors and then export those highlights out to a Google Doc. And it also keeps source information, which can be helpful for students if they're using it as a research tool. Any other questions?
All right, this is Cynthia. I think that we caught all the questions that happened before. I know Sandra's question came up a little bit earlier, but I wanted to make sure I didn't want to interrupt the flow. So I'm glad that Diana also re-entered her question there in the chat, and she had a follow-up question, which was great. Betty, thanks so much for your question around middle schoolers, and I think that Sandra's question too was about some students who are a little bit older, so thanks so much for joining the webinar on young children, because I think so many of these concepts certainly apply as kids transition from preschool to elementary school to middle school. So I think it's great that we had some educators at the middle level and maybe even higher. So thank you very much. Shelley just answered a question. You could focus on teaching literacy skills. Oh, so she has a recommendation for Betty. You could focus on teaching literacy skills to the student to support spelling. Teaching literacy is so important, especially for students with complex communication needs. And she put an AAC literacy link in there. And is that Penn State University, Shelley? Is that what the PSU is by chance? Okay, great. So it's a Penn State resource.
Yeah, and Shelley, we really we agree with what your suggestion was as well, because even though you're introducing these tools to students, you're not necessarily taking away their literacy instruction or working on those literacy skills. The tools that we're talking about are really just to help to make reading and writing more accessible for that student. So thank you for pointing that out.
And I think that's such an important point, that assistive technology is really support and access, that it really augments good instruction regardless of what that content is, whether it's literacy or community. I think that that's something that we don't always focus on because we have such little time during webinars. I know at the AIM Center, when we are doing webinars on accessible materials, we really talk a lot about what are the sources, how do you, some of the technical aspects of accessible materials that you raised, that it's not just access to the materials or access to technology, that there are really some important points around good instruction that certainly don't replace the technology, whether it's educational technology or assistive technology.
Absolutely.
So it looks like we have finished the questions, and I'm going to give Terry and Elizabeth a minute. If you have plenty of time, if there are any closing remarks or summary points that you want to make before we officially conclude the webinar.
Well, just thank you so much to the AIM Center for having us. And if anyone has any questions after today, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is on the screen. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have afterwards.
Yeah, just because we are located in Minnesota doesn't mean that folks outside of Minnesota can't reach out to us with questions or ideas or thoughts. We love to talk to people from all over. So, and also, I'll just add, we do a wide array of trainings at the Pacer Center as well, and most of the trainings, especially the technology-based trainings, those are things that are available via live stream. So, and we do offer trainings, that are in a wide array of topics. So ranging from early childhood topics like this, or might be early childhood communication, but ranging all the way up through elementary age into high school, transition age, and sometimes even working on skills for individuals that are older than that. So if you found what you learned today interesting, just know that we do our trainings via live stream as well. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Terry Rosen and Elizabeth Berry, AT Specialists at the Pacer Simon Technology Center. In case you came in a little bit late, those were the experts that you had the pleasure of learning with and from today. And thank you, everybody who posted some questions and comments that add greatly to the conversation and what we all benefit from. So I'm going to go ahead and post today's evaluation. It looks like there's another comment in the chat. If somebody wants to comment on that while I bring the evaluation into view.
Oh, Shelley, it's great to hear that. That's really, our hope in having these documents is that, people will find them easy to use to help, their consideration of assistive technology more manageable and something that, becomes kind of a standard part of their process.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for attending to today's webinar. If you please take a couple of minutes to complete our evaluation, we'd greatly appreciate it. We'll also share this feedback with our friends at the Pacer Simon Technology Center as well, so that all of us can continue to improve our work and address your needs and your requests. There are a couple of different ways that you can access the survey. Sorry, I was just reading John's his closing remark, gobble gobble. It kind of caught me off guard. Thank you, John. Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Hope everybody has a chance to enjoy time with family and friends toward the end of the week. I think this was a great way to start the week, and we'll have hopefully everybody will enjoy the end of the week as well. To go to the evaluation for today's webinar, you can choose to click on the link that's displaying in the center of your screen where it says Go to Evaluation by clicking here. Then the Browse To button will become available to you. You click that and you'll be taken to the evaluation. Alternatively, when we end the webinar, when we close the room, the survey will open automatically. So we'll get you either before you leave or we'll get you when you leave. So please, please do that evaluation for us. And, oh, is it the wrong link, John? That's interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close the room then because that should take you, oh, that's interesting. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this. And when I close the room, you'll be taken to the correct evaluation. Thank you, John. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you at the next AIM Center webinar.